people that are catering to be true. So therefore they're getting fraudulent candidates that aren't necessarily even thoughtful because of things like TV and the rhetorical presidency.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the pushbacks that I've been receiving recently too, when it's talking about the angle of fraud or something. And Sean's correct. I mean, we do have several reports currently going on, and Sean, let me know what you want to do here. I'm not sure if we're still streaming on YouTube or if we want to just restart on Facebook or what. But we've seen
just
several
keep going,
reports.
buddy. Just keep going.
We've seen several reports right now already indicating that, like, hey, this is not just a hypothetical anymore. There may be actual fraud taking place, right? And again, I think that's I really, I really want to qualify this statement because I don't know who may or may not be listening right now, but in some weird small part of me kind of wants to say, like, all right, dude, but hold on, like that fear for Republicans about fraud taking place would only be justified if they are making a clear, devoted stance ahead of time that, like, we're not going to be doing any of the fraud. I mean, they could. Okay, if the idea is like we're all going to play a game where the rules are fair, and if Democrats are going to partake in some fraudulent activity of, say, ballot harvesting or something like that, well, all we have to do is look back to 2016. In 2016, it was a member of the GOP that was caught for doing fraudulent ballot harvesting in North Carolina. All right, so this has happened already with the Republican Party. So I guess some part of me wants to say, man, like, this is where I don't understand necessarily either one of the angles as to why it would be bad for the Republican Party to rely upon a mail-in process, because part of me says, yeah, but we could play that Republicans could play that cheat game as much as Democrats do, and they have in the past. So as far as winning or losing an election, man, if all rules are out the window, if it's a sense of warfare, if it's just about who's going to win the battle, Republicans could play that game. And the other part of this too, I don't quite understand, man, is like, I don't know why Republicans haven't made some type of a contingency plan for this, right? I don't know why Republicans haven't made a contingency plan for if we're doing the mail-in process. I don't know, man. Can't you get your people to vote? Can't you get your people riled up? Can't Republicans do the mail-in voting process as well as Democrats could? What am I missing there? Let me say this real quick, and I'll kick it to Zig for a response here, man. I was listening to this guy the other day. His name's Tim Pool. He's a YouTube commentator. Now, since he has retracted this statement after he looked at some statistics, but initially on the Joe Rogan podcast last week, he said something to the effect of a lot of millennials are going to be more likely to do a mail-in process than they would actually show up to a physical spot. Now, that simple notion by itself may not be statistically accurate at every city in the nation, but do you think there is something to that? Let me ask it this way, Zig. Do Democrats do the mail-in game better than Republicans do? Is that where the fear is?
Well, I don't even necessarily think that there's a fear in general. I think that the people at the top know that mail-in ballots really aren't necessarily going to make a difference. They just need something to rile people up over, which why they're doing that, I don't know. But really, what's perhaps bothersome or what people should be concerned about is always needing some kind of opposition before you take action.
Hmm.
So, for example, why should I have to be upset to do the things that I'm going to do anyways, like encourage people to vote? That should be seen as the perhaps greater problem, in my opinion, is that why do people always have to focus on some alleged opposition? Go out and do whatever it is you're supposed to do. You don't have to have an opposition to be as engaged as you should. To me, I just don't understand how that's good politics and good for humanity or society.
Is that a personal issue, do you think? And that's a weird way to ask the follow-up question. Let me ask it this way. Is this a societal issue where every single person just bought in so much to the fabricated reality that we all need to be just pissed off at the other person, right? That in order to take action or in order to be genuinely motivated, we have to be upset at something else. Is this something that's been a top-down push that can be solved with a top-down solution? You get what I'm saying? I don't know, some sociological approach or some government program or something would just like reins in the media a little bit. Okay, something to say like, hey, calm that stuff down a little bit. You're getting too out of control. Or is this a personal issue where on a case-by-case basis, people are going to have to look at themselves and say like, I don't know, maybe I'm the problem. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and part of it is just the nature of science. The science is that people are more driven to do things from fear. But at some point, people ought to be rational enough to overcome that fear and recognize, hey, we need to do something else. We ought to be driven by confidence instead of fear.
Hmm. I wish we could be driven by confidence instead of fear, man. I really do. And I say
Well,
that.
But part of the issue also is that society-wide, if we're always continually driven by fear, fear leads to a less open society. If you can only talk about what you're doing in reaction to somebody else, you can't share your ideas with other people. You're not
Right.
going to want to take action to do that. So that's the issue is with all these people always going to try to instill fear in people, that over time will have a very dangerous effect on our society.
Well, and here's the reason why I asked that, man, is because it seems like both sides now are willing to make some concessions to kind of get a win, at least for the short term. I'm talking about in particular this Fox News headline that just came out a couple hours back, right before the show. This story obviously broke sometime last week or even weeks prior to, but it's been developing as we go forward. Headline being: Trump considers a panel to review complaints of anti-conservative bias on social media. And Sean actually said it right before we got on air. It's right before we got on air. He said something to the effect of like, "Oh, it's going to be awesome for this time. Okay, it'll be awesome for it'll be awesome for this president. But what's going to happen to the truth czar when it becomes the next president?" All right, here's the story. President Trump is considering establishing a panel to review complaints of anti-conservative bias on social media, according to people familiar with the matter, in a move that would likely draw pushback from tech companies and others. Now, that "and others" is the operative term. Of course, it's going to draw pushback from the tech companies. No company wants to be labeled as a monopoly, but that's inevitably what's going to end up happening if they keep playing this game with each other. It's the "and others" that I'm more concerned about. Going on with the article, it says that the plans are still under discussion, but could include the establishment of a White House created commission that would examine allegations of online bias and censorship. These people said, I don't know who these people are, didn't necessarily, whatever. The administration could also encourage similar reviews of federal regulatory agencies such as the FCC and the FEC. They said, here's the quote: left wing, this is coming from a White House official, left wing bias in the tech world is a concern that definitely needs to be addressed from our vantage point. Meaning from our vantage point, it needs to be addressed, not that it needs to be addressed strictly from the White House's vantage point. Nevertheless, going on to say, and at least exposed, the bias needs to at least be exposed so that Americans have a clear understanding about what they're dealing with. Now, part of that I agree with. The other part I completely disagree with. The latter half of that statement I understand. This issue needs to be exposed fully so Americans can fully understand what they're getting involved with. So every time you click something on Facebook or every time you go into YouTube or anytime you share something anywhere else, you're understanding that there's obviously going to be a bias. We might have actually just ran directly up against it a few minutes ago when we started talking in certain things that we shouldn't be saying, right? We might have gotten shut down. I don't know. That bias needs to be clearly understood and clearly stated ahead of time so you can make a free market choice. I don't necessarily agree with the first statement, though, with the White House official coming out and saying left-wing bias in the tech world is a concern that definitely needs to be addressed from our vantage point. From the White House's vantage point, dude, the White House has no business addressing this, as far as I'm concerned. Ziggy may feel differently. Here's the last thing I'll say, though. Comes to Trump's tweet. He says the radical left is in total command and control of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Google. True, I'd say. He goes on to say the administration is working to remedy this illegal situation. Stay tuned and send names and events. Thank you, Michelle. He's quoting another, status somebody else quoting there. Here's how I feel, though, Zig, and let me know if I'm wrong, because obviously, there's a legal angle to this that I'm not exactly addressing right now. My personal opinion has always been Facebook. If you want to create a terrible product and run that product into the ground by running off every single conservative that would ever type anything into it, by all means, do it. Go ahead and feel free to do it. I will say, though, as a quick caveat, I understand as far as it pertains to sort of the public square of exchange of information, where you go for the marketplace, if you will, of new ideas. If you're being squashed out of a place where 2.5 billion or 3 billion or however many billion people are on Facebook, if you're being squashed out of that right now, I don't know, man. Does it lend itself to something where that's a restriction in the First Amendment type? Certainly of the values of it. But when do you start entering that realm of it actually being First Amendment restriction? Anyways, man, go ahead, Zig. I've been rambling. I'll kick to Shine after this.
Oh no, I think the issue is that are we really being restricted? For one, we don't have any concrete evidence that is in fact the case, but also too, I would imagine that if people continue to antagonize these people, I don't think antagonizing people who are antagonized in any situation is going to lead to more freedom, right? So if you feel like you're being censored, whatever. But then if you're going to turn around and insult those people and say, "Hey, you guys are dumb. You guys are trying to run some kind of scam," are they going to be more likely to be friendly to you or less likely? I mean, I think the clear thing, no matter what, in any situation, is if you don't like what's going on, be civil about it, and then also try to deal with the situation constructively. Like, I might not like some of the people, or they might not like me. I guess we don't know because we probably don't know each other's opinion fully, but I can still be civil. I don't have to bash the platform. And furthermore, most people don't know anybody who does work at Facebook. So you can't say what they're doing or not. And you don't know what their intentions or motivations are. So just to automatically, and that's a social problem, is attributing motives to people you don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know what the motives of people in Facebook are. They don't know what my motives are. If they did, that would be weird. I'd be worrying about some kind of like brain scan technology. But the fact is, you don't know what other people are thinking or why they're doing what they're doing.
Would, and to some extent, obviously, the legal understanding of this, just as a preface into Sean giving his opinion, there's been a concern, obviously, of whether Facebook, Twitter, to some extent, Google, it's just a totally different argument with Google, but at least Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, whether they're considered publishers or platforms, right? And if you start selectively discriminating against a certain ideology or a particular worldview, right, or a very specific politic, then you end up looking more like a publisher than you do a platform. A platform would have this neutral approach to everything. It's either everything's okay or nothing's okay within some type of reasonable consideration. But if you start selecting that conservative, that libertarian, as opposed to just letting everything else fly, right? Louis Farrakhan gets to get out there and spout his anti-Semitism all day long, but anything else resembling it on something on the other side, that gets shut down. Now, all of a sudden, you start to look more like a platform. I mean, more like a publisher. Right. The idea being is that, hey, man, if you're going to be a platform and not held liable for what's posted on your website in the same way that New York Times would be held liable if they publish a statement from me. If I wrote a letter to the editor in New York Times and it said, I don't know, Donald Trump did something illegal, fill in the blank of whatever the illegal thing is. If they published that knowing that it was illegal with malicious intent, they could then, be held liable for that. I suppose you could sue them for, I don't know, malintent or discriminate or defamatory, whatever. Defamation is what you could sue them for. It's the point I'm making. You can't do that to Facebook. And I think that's where it's drawing this line is as you start to look more and more like a publisher, you become less and less like a platform. And especially when you look at someone like a Bezos out there, buying up all this stuff. Anyways, man, I'm rambling again. Shine, though, give me your opinion on this, though, but I know you've been waiting for a minute.
Oh, no, it's all good, man. I appreciate it. Well, that's weird. Hold on, let me pin you real quick. But while I'm pinning you, I'll talk here. And just to challenge Zig a little bit, we know who has gotten banned. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like secret, the people have gotten banned. And they are of a certain political leaning. And we can derive motivations from that, I believe. Also, too, I think it's as much a cronyism issue as it is a First Amendment issue. Because as you said, just there very articulately, Mr. Henry, the big tech companies are getting special protections that other publishers do not get. And because of that special protection, there's a distortion in the market. There's obviously, as far as money, because they have a protection, they're so much bigger than the New York Times, right? They're so much bigger than television. They're bigger than newspapers. And it's because they don't have to worry about getting sued. So there's a cronyism issue there. There's also the issue if I'm harmed, I could be not just doing my First Amendment, I could be doing business on these platforms, right? And I could get that ability to do business taken away. And if I feel like I've followed the rules, I have no recourse. And I think in just about every retail store, when someone says, just for instance, another cronyism argument, if I go to Home Depot and they say, here's the rules, here the dishwasher's on sale for $475. They can't raise the price when I get there to the store and say, well, we just advertised it at $475 to get you in here, but now it's $525. That's illegal, right? That's false advertising. It's fraud. You can't do it. But Facebook and Google get the special protection of making rules, engaging people in commerce, and then the ability to change those rules, taking away people's ability to do commerce. And then there's no recourse because federal law doesn't allow any lawsuits. So it's as much a cronyism issue as it is First Amendment. You can say they're a company, they can do whatever they want. Yeah, but I'm allowed to complain about it. Like, I have a First Amendment to complain about a company doing something bad, but I also feel like it's not necessarily a First Amendment thing. It's cronyism. It's special protections for special businesses that are becoming monopolies because of those protections, just like they would in any other sector of the market.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Zig.
and I think that I would respond to that simply by pointing out the main thing that I'm trying to point out here is the fact that people know that there's a good chance that they could get in trouble for saying something, and yet some people do it to intentionally push the boundaries until they get kicked off, which is what had happened with a number of people who identify as conservative. They intentionally did things to upset people, and then when people got fed up, now they want to cry wolf like they didn't know that it was going to happen. Okay, the fact of the matter is that they did. And also, if you disagree with these people, again, you're allowed to do that, but you don't have to go out of your way to go out and bash these people. That's the main point that I'm trying to make. And
I
as of
can
whether or
call
not,
for a level playing field. I can call for a level playing field and say, if you can sue the New York Times, you should be able to sue Facebook or Google.
well, right, but personally, I don't think anybody should be calling for any lawsuits. I think we need fewer lawsuits. I think we need people to, if they don't like something, go to a new platform, create your own platform. And yes, will it be harder to do? Yeah, no doubt. But once you do it, and after you've overcome those barriers, you'll be so much prouder that you were able to do that in the face of adversity. So I think that's tremendously important, right?
I appreciate his spirit, well, what he's saying right now, and everything Zig is saying is true. But the big question is, during COVID-19, where was the public square? It wasn't in public, was it? It was right here on the internet. This is the public square. This is the First Amendment. It's never been more evident in any time in our modern internet world that being online is free speech, period. If you can't be online, you are being restricted in a way that I believe is, it's not fair. It's not right, because this is the public square. You couldn't even go outside 2 months ago, right? Public square was not available. So this was it.
Yeah, and I'm acknowledging that fact simply by saying that you can easily acknowledge something's not fair and move on and work past it. Like I've been through a number of stuff in my personal life that wasn't necessarily fair per se, but I still had to work through it and move past it. And I think my issue is when people get hung up over this stuff, that stops them from creating their own thing and being more productive, where a lot of people harbor resentment. And it's very difficult to say harboring resentment is healthy. Okay, and especially during COVID-19, we don't need people resentful and angry because they can't use a platform that they know didn't like them to start with. To
I mean,
me, go ahead.
no, let me say this here too, and this is going to sound like a very strange way to pitch an Americans for Prosperity petition. Give me about 2 minutes and I'll unpack this entire thing. Top of the show notes, though, you're going to see something there. It's a letters to the legislator section. All right, you click on the Evernote section. You're going to see at the very, very top. It's called Letter to Legislators. One of them says, reject bailouts. You can call your, Senator Alexander. You can call Senator Blackburn directly with those numbers. Say no to a property tax increase here in Nashville. Or another alternative situation here, Tennessee, telemedicine. Maintain telemedicine, okay? It's a restriction that was lifted during this COVID-19 situation. Mr. Henry, how does any of that connect to what we're talking about with Facebook? Okay. I studied this philosopher Baudrillard for a while back, right? And he had this idea. It was sort of and I'm speaking a little bit loosely here, man, because philosophy is not my area, but this is why one of the reasons why I brought Zig on. He speaks a little bit about the critique of communism. And one of his critiques of communism is it was really meant to apply primarily to commodities. Okay, it was meant to apply to an economic situation. And you start having this element where communism then starts to apply to sociological situations. And then you start getting in this sense where individuals end up becoming the commodity. In a sense, the symbol itself is all that's representative, or i.e. what the symbol stands for. So in Russia, he would say, for example, it's not necessarily about who holds the title. The title is what's important. It's not necessarily important if Grant Henry was ranked such and such, if I was a sergeant or general or whatever else in the Army. The only thing that's important is the title of sergeant or general. You know what I'm saying? His critique of communism was essentially is that you become so much a part of the system that you lose your identity and the system itself overwhelms. The system becomes the identity. And therefore, every marker of value in that system is only ascribed to what the system defines. You have no inherent value. The individual has no inherent value. And I'm transitioning into Facebook, man, because occasionally I see the same thing happening in Facebook. Occasionally I see the same thing happening in YouTube. Occasionally I see what ends up happening to all of us is we put so much of ourselves out there in this sense of a virtue signal, right? We put so much of ourselves out there of, if I can just tag the right thing, if I can just hashtag the right way, if I can just get enough likes, if I can just, rise my status to the level of enough followers and subscribers and whatever else, not only can I make a possible living, but I can maintain relevancy. I can achieve relevancy. I can become more than the symbol itself. Now, how does that tie back into the Americans for Prosperity thing? This is part of the reason why we like to do what we do in this community, is because, unfortunately, man, a lot of this stuff is out of our control. A lot of this nonsense on Facebook, it's out of the control of the government sometimes too, bro. Like the quickest way to solve this is just to stop using the platform. The quickest way to solve this, frankly speaking, is to just let Facebook create an awful product and drive it into the ground. Now, granted, that train has left the station. With 3 billion people on there, what are you going to do? With Google having the only true algorithm in searching out there, what are you going to do? You have to break out of it somehow. You have to get beyond the sensation of what I talked about before, of your value only being represented in that system, in that terrible system. I'm telling y'all, that's what brought me to work for this company. One quick time, hard line of delineation. We do this program on our own behalf. Shine and I do. I'm not necessarily speaking on behalf of AFP. I don't know what I may or may not be saying, but I'll say this right now. What brought me to this company is exactly what we're talking about, dude. I got a sense of like nihilism, true political nihilism. None of it mattered, man. Didn't matter how much I virtue signaled. I needed a way to break through some of that trash, to actually get back to it. I think one of the solutions of this, man, is to stop communicating with people through a screen, which I know is difficult right now in the COVID situation. I know it's extremely difficult, but at a minimum, at least try and humanize as much as you possibly can. Reach out to people you haven't talked to before. Take action in a way that actually makes a difference instead of just virtue signaling, because it's just a symbol. It's just a symbol that means something else. The value is inherent with just the title of it. You bring no inherent value to it, and you lose a sense not just of identity, but meaning. You lose sense of meaning in your own existence as to why you're here. And yeah, that's a major pitch for AFP. I get it, okay? I'm a little bit over the top here. But follow me for 10 final seconds. I'll kick it to y'all from response here. If you can call your senator, man, or if you can call your legislator, or if there's some issue going on and you can have an opportunity to take action on something, or I don't know, man, if you can actually have a voice again, finally, in this day and age where you didn't think you had meaning before, that's part of what brought me here, is seriously a conviction of like, I don't know, man, maybe I could actually do something for real this time around, right? I don't know. Am I off here though? You get what I'm saying? Zig, let me kick to you. I'll kick it to Sean.
Yeah, no, that's the exact point that I'm trying to make. Is you don't have to play by the rules of these virtual games. If you don't like it, you can. People say Facebook is ubiquitous. Oh yeah, to some extent, but on the other hand, you can go right on an independent platform. You can then send that to your friends, and then you can tell them to send that to their friends. And the same thing that we do with our petitions. So this idea, and this is how bad things have gotten, is now people think they're powerless if they don't have access to an online luxury. Okay, I'm powerless. I can't do anything because Facebook won't let me say what I want. Well, come on. I mean, they've really tricked you into thinking that. That's a trick. So you keep using their platform, and it's unwarranted.
Yeah, and I say that also because I just don't see another way of I just couldn't defend any presidential administration setting up something to where they're going to have a say-so in what is deemed censorship and what is not deemed censorship, as far as it pertains to a private corporation being able to do that, all right? Because it's cool if Trump's doing it today, and I agree with his decision, but if it's Bernie the next day, or if it's Biden, God forbid, or I don't know, man, if it's Buttigieg or whoever's going to come next, man, I just don't know, like, right? Like, we already have a problem with bias. What then if you have a problem with bias that's backed by the White House saying it? And then if the United States government is backing that, man, now all of a sudden you got a problem, because like we have the most stringent First Amendment protections in the world, as far as my understanding. But if we start loosening some of that, and I'm not talking like a government entity here, okay, it's not a government action taking place necessarily. It's about the underlying values of what is and is not the First Amendment. And you can change. That's my real concept here, is you can change how the populace thinks and considers what the First Amendment is and is not without ever touching the law. Right? Like, you can get an entire generation of individuals to think like, yeah, hate speech is already criminalized. We're already there. We are there right now. Poll millennials, and the vast majority of them think, first of all, that hate speech is already criminalized. And when you tell them it's not, they say, well, it should be. Right? So goal accomplished. It doesn't matter what the First Amendment says at that point if people self-censor. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, man, Sean, let me know if you want to comment here before I hit the next topic, though.
I just hope that they use the panel to inform legislation, not to take power to do action. You get what I'm saying? I would love to hear a Justice Department opinion on whether or not the 1996 Federal Communications Act needs to be updated, because when they were writing it, it was for forums and message boards, not for these multi-billion person platforms. And maybe like the legislature, and this goes back to Congress, we can't use the executive to solve our problems. We can't use the judges to solve our problems. If we have problems, we don't like the way society is being run, legislation needs to be written. But Congress hasn't updated their legislation in 24 years, almost the entire lifetime of the internet, and maybe it just needs to be looked at. That's all I'm saying. I don't pretend to know what the solutions are, but I know a lot of people don't like the current situation, and I feel like there's a cronyism, government using law to create monopoly in a sector where it would not exist without that protection. I think there would be more platforms, Zig, if people could sue platforms, but you can't. So they are completely unafraid of the customer. They're completely unafraid of the vendor. They are basically God in their sector because they own the servers. And no other industry is that way. None. No other industry is that way.
But I think factually speaking, there are more platforms. You can, if you want to say something, you can write it in the Medium post and send it to your friends. You can walk next door, give it to your friends.
And then Google can take it off of their search results. And like nobody can find it unless you do peer-to-peer. And then they won't, you won't even be able to prove that Google took off its search results because of how good they are with their algorithm. And you're not allowed to sue them for that, even if you paid to be on the search results. And then they take, what I'm saying is they can violate contracts. I mean, don't you believe that people should be able to be sued for violating contracts? You can't sue them for that. They can say it's our platform. And that's all I'm saying is I hope the Justice Department informs the Congress that that legislation is old and needs to be re-updated, and then just gives them recommendation and ultimately gives them the sovereignty, or, you know, acknowledges the sovereignty of Congress to write the legislation. I really don't want them to make a ministry of truth. That would just be the worst.
The point that I'm making also too is that you can do the right thing, and you can send it to your friends, and if it gets censored by a platform, and even though you're doing the right thing, and even if you're not financially or commercially successful, you should in fact take joy just in doing the right thing on its own. That in itself is inherently pleasant. And if people can't do that, then I don't know. I mean, if you can't do the right thing without some kind of motive, then perhaps you have some soul searching to do, because it shouldn't have to be about money or getting it to people. You should be happy just doing the right thing.
Hey, and obviously, you know, we started a little bit late this morning, so we might have to end it a little bit early here, at least early in the sense of it not going to a traditional full hour of this thing. So probably coming up on the last little story here. I did want to respond to a question on Facebook here from Albert asking, got to know if Mr. Henry's wearing pants. Yeah, I am. Actually, I'm wearing pants, but how would you know? Right? Like, how would you know? So I do think that part and parcel, the reason why this has even become a conversation is obviously because Trump has been sort of, but not just Trump, okay? It's not just the Trump administration. For several years prior to this, two Democrats were preaching the same story here, so it doesn't necessarily matter. But everyone at some point has had this conversation of, look, Alphabet, Google, which is Alphabet, okay, Alphabet, YouTube, same thing, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, all these companies, man, at what point do they become monopolies? Right, and this is the conversation you're seeing. This link to the show notes. The Reuters headline: U.S. Attorneys General likely to bring antitrust lawsuits against Google. This is an inside source saying this thing, and it's an interesting thing with Google because one has to sort of stop and pause and ask the question and say, like, what do they technically have a monopoly over? One might say the access to information, which I suppose that's true, but it's not necessarily because they've like sapped up all the resources. It's not a Rockefeller type situation. Okay. It's not a situation where you control the entirety of a single commodity and you're just not expressing that or branching that out to any. You make it so that you squash out all the players. I mean, maybe it is because the algorithm is just so good that nobody else can compete. Maybe it's also a thing because Google is doing a little bit of stuff behind the scenes that is technically squashing out other players. I mean, they're buying them out, or I don't know, man, they're bidding them out, or they're basically buying more ads than they can possibly keep up with, or something I found out about last night that Google pays an outrageous amount of money. I'm talking tens of billions, if not much, much more, an outrageous amount of money to make sure that Google is the primary search engine, the default search engine on all the actual internet browsers out there. So I'm talking obviously their own Google Chrome, 100% for sure. But Mozilla Firefox and Safari come built in, baked in, with Google being the only search thing that you have to go change. And they play an absolute premium, which is an odd thing to think about because Google and Apple are direct competitors in this landscape. They are, I mean, they are actual direct competitors in every other sense of the word, both by way of the products that they sell, the stuff that they push out there, and everything else. So, look, the only reason I'm saying this, I think because Trump has ramped up this conversation so much about the FTC cracking down a potential monopolization of Google and Amazon, they're starting to listen up a little bit, okay? Because they don't want to see, they don't want what happened to them is what happened to Microsoft or what about happened to Microsoft back in the day, right? Or looking at any telecommunications company that happened back in the day or anything like this. And I will say, if for nothing else, my Google around the house is going off, by the way. But if for nothing else, one story that people don't pay a lot of attention to is this conversation, this rhetoric from the Trump administration is what forced Google on their own accord to stop doing business with Huawei, which in my mind is a little bit of a win. All right. Anytime you can get an American tech company to stop just sort of like voluntarily quit doing business with the Chinese government, I don't know, man. I see that as a bit of a qualified win, and I know it's a bad thing to say. I'm just whatever. It is what it is. I'll give Zig and Sean the last word here as we're ending the show. But Zig, go ahead, man.
Well, so on that matter, that's exactly what I urged against the last time that I was on. Is that
right.
yeah, people might be upset. Okay, great, that's totally warranted to be upset about what goes on in China. But the thing is, we're in too deep. Okay, and so because we're already in too deep, we might as well mitigate the damage and at least try to maintain a decent relationship until we can afford to pivot to something else. But it's not the case that taking resentful action is automatically the best case. In the same way, if China was your spouse and you were mad at your spouse and you started screaming at them and threw your wedding ring, would that help your marriage? Probably not. It might make you feel good for maybe 2 seconds until you realize the damage you've done. It's the same thing with China, in my humble opinion.
Man, I hear you there. Sean, go ahead if you want to have a last word too. If not, we'll go ahead and end the show for today. I thought I heard you come in there for a second. Sorry. Sure.
And I've been muted this whole time. I love smacking down China. I just got 2 words, Project Dragonfly. Google got caught making the censorship technology for the Chinese Communist government. I don't want the #1 search engine in the United States with 0 competitors working on censorship technology with the Chinese government. I don't want them to do that. I don't. And I'm willing to use the force of government to stop them to do that. At least that's my vote. My one person in the 360 million people. My vote is use the U.S. government to put up a great wall around China and keep them from touching our businesses, our academics, our politicians, our TVA people here in Tennessee, because we had a TVA vice president, the people who run our utilities got caught giving information to China. Obviously, these people don't have our best interest in mind. And obviously, laying down and letting them stab us in the stomach is not a good strategy. Okay? Loving them and giving them hugs is not going to keep them from stealing from us. Loving them and giving them hugs isn't going to keep them from infiltrating our largest businesses and doing harmful things to the American people. And I hope that if the U.S. government can do anything, I'd like them to protect me from China. I'm not really worried about anybody else in the world. But I don't like what Google has been doing with them, and I don't like what the U.S. government has been allowing them to do. I mean, Grant, something you could do some more research on is the reason they don't have as many competitors is it's kind of like the reason Amazon doesn't have a lot of competitors. We focus on what they're best at, but they're into everything. Yeah. And it makes You can't just start a business because you need other business partners doing other vendors doing other things, and Google owns those people. Does that make sense? And Apple's very similar in the way Apple might get an antitrust because of how they run their app store for a very similar reason, because they own most of the process of production. Get it? Think about like a company owning, like they're the main company in your area that makes the roads, but they also own the concrete. And they're also the main person that gets people from the union. They control every bit of the process. That would make prices high. It would make service bad. And government would inevitably become married with that company because they need roads too. Government needs search engines, right? And if our main search engine is working with the Chinese communists to censor their people, what if our government starts working on stuff like that? What if Google being good at that makes that sexy for our government? I just don't like it. And I think as a world, just like we did with the Nuremberg trials, and we said, here's an absolute, no matter where you come from, no matter what culture you're a part of, this is wrong. I think the United States needs to stand up and be an example about censorship, online free speech stuff, and stand up in the world and say freedom of speech is important and it keeps us safe. We've learned that the Chinese communists lying and censoring has probably killed over 1 million people in the past few months, right? China lying and censoring has killed people in this country, over 100,000 now. So censorship is not a matter of comfortability. It's a matter of life and death. We all need to be a part of the conversation in order to survive as a culture. And I don't know. I think we need to stand up and make that, even if we don't like the way it looks, even if we stumble through it and don't do it perfectly, I think the United States needs to stand up for free speech internationally.
It's a good way to end the program right there, man, as we're pulling up the outro music here. All three of us actually have some real jobs we probably need to get to do and stuff. I'm not sure what's going on with Zigzag out there in Pennsylvania way, but we'll talk about that after we get off the air. By the way, a few stories we didn't touch on today. I'll throw that in the Evernote story section of these show notes. Probably cover those in the next couple of days. There's a situation going on with Michael Flynn Judge, 3 reasons why he's actually hired a defense attorney. I definitely want to get to that here coming up. Susan Rice email. You're going to hear some people talking about that over the next couple of days here. Go ahead and click that in the show notes. Read up on that a little bit for yourself as well. Federal government's also been buying up a bunch of riot gear and increasing security funding, citing the coronavirus pandemic. I don't know what they're prepping for, what they're possibly getting ready for. Obviously, I would know what they're prepping for and getting ready for. It's a reality I would not like to accept necessarily. And last story of the day here, I'm not sure when we're going to get to this because this is a super volatile issue, but it's just a super interesting one as well. Utah apparently now has decriminalized polygamy with a near unanimous support by the legislature. It just brings up really interesting conversations, man, of after Obergefell, what role does the government have to play in marriage at all, if any? I mean, I don't know, man. Maybe make it a religious thing again, or maybe just make it a social contract, or who knows, man. But all these issues and more possibly getting to tomorrow. My name is Mr. Henry. Zig over there. Thanks so much for joining us. David Shine Thompson, as always. We'll be back tomorrow doing it big.